This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. Welcome into the Huskies Warming House Podcast, episode 166 here in the Den. Nick Max and Noah Grant here in the middle of June to bring you the show. It's a bit of a different show. It's what I would maybe refer to as a transitional show, so to speak. The fans have spoken in our fan poll. Not that kind of transition, Nick. I knew that popped into your head, and we're going to avoid that at all costs. But
hockey, come on. I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, okay. But regardless, we have some changes that are coming to the show, and they're fairly significant for a variety of reasons. Number one, we are going to be moving into our summer slate after this week in terms of both the WCHA and the NCHC. We're really going to expand our previews related to all of the teams that encompass both of those leagues and, of course, our St. Cloud State Huskies. So we'll kind of open that up as well at the tail end of the show, as well as just the general changes to the show. It's going to be a much different feel as far as the rhythm moving forward. And it might even be different as far as the look and the way hosting goes. So we'll kind of walk through that as we move forward into the later portions of the main portion of the show. It will likely be a bit of a shorter show today as well, too. So the only other main portion topic that we're going to talk about is the Stanley Cup final, and just kind of briefly mention a little bit of some AHL things. I know a lot of listeners will get to this as well, are wondering, what about Arizona State? It will tie into the end of the show as well, too, as to our plan for that news related to the NCHC, which is obviously very big as we move forward. And then the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, we'll start with that. Changes coming to that as well, too. So we'll dive into it, and we start, as always, with Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, Noah. Maybe the final time we do this. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is a big one. Michael Andlauer, who is going to be purchasing the Ottawa Senators. After it seemed like the commissioner had said that it could be weeks, just a week ago, before this process may actually finally be finished. And it still technically isn't, but minority owner of the Montreal Canadiens is now set to buy the Ottawa Senators for just a shade under $1 billion. He'll have to sell his stake in the Habs if it is approved. And again, that's the caveat, right? Is that there is a principal agreement in place. However, it has to be approved by the league and its board of governors, hence the other owners. But it looks like finally some resolution coming to the sale of the Ottawa Senators, because longer this thing plays out, shall we say, other things may start hurting, including the players feeling a little bit more uncertain about their futures as well. Speaking of other news north of the border with the Calgary Flames, finally some new blood. This is what I like to see personally. They're promoting assistant coach Ryan Huska to take over as the top coach for the Flames. 47-year-old, spent the previous 5 seasons as an assistant on the Flames staff. First NHL head coaching opportunity, but he's also guided their AHL affiliate for 4 seasons, before joining the big club. He also led the WHL's Kelowna Rockets to a Memorial Cup berth in 2009. So plenty of experience going to Calgary, and more importantly, not any more recycled coaches unless your name's the New York Rangers. So speaking of which, though, what's stay out east, right? Because there's still some more news to the eastern part of the country. The Pittsburgh Penguins have hired Jason Spezza, speaking of the Ottawa-Pittsburgh, shall we say, connection, right, as assistant general manager. So congratulations to him. This was just announced just today. So very relatively recent news as we're recording this again Wednesday the 14th. A couple of other ones that may have happened over the past week. Arizona, Toronto. Apparently the rumors and everything else continues to just get more weird. They hire Shane Doan as special advisor to general manager Brad Treliving, who again recently appointed to that same post. We talked about the Rangers. They did hire Peter Laviolette as their next head coach. Laviolette now fifth maybe head coaching opportunity. So Rangers, looking to get an experienced coach. They're in definitely a Stanley Cup push. So I sort of get it, but you kind of wonder how long that leash is, because it seems like the leash on any coach with the Rangers has been maybe max 2 years as of recent look. And the Philadelphia Flyers continued to purge broadcasters, this time adding Patrick Sharp to the front office. So not only Keith Jones going in terms of a front office, well, now Patrick Sharp, who I thought, great player, obviously his time in Chicago, Dallas, Philadelphia, even for a brief matter. But even as a broadcaster, really refined his craft. I thought he was actually very insightful, both in the studio as well as essentially eyesight. And the Flyers saying, this guy seems like he knows what he's doing. So they're also putting him in the front office as they continue to remake a lot of those positions there under new GM Daniel Briere.
Yeah, well, with the potential changes to regional sports networks, maybe it's kind of a twofold gig. They run the team and also run the broadcast too, right? We'll have to.
Well, and if you're Patrick Sharp, if it really goes down, maybe you can lace him up. Who knows? So
yeah, great player, obviously, a Stanley Cup champion with the Chicago Blackhawks, multiple cups as well too for him. So a lot of experience. Danny Briere, great player, and then of course Keith Jones, who you talk about someone who also has refined his craft when it comes to the broadcasting world. A fantastic analyst, and of course will be well missed in that regard. Potentially might see him in some capacity and maybe some special events or some things like that. But moving forward, obviously a very full-time job for Philadelphia. We always say that though, but then, like we see things like we saw John Cooper, on for one of the events and stuff,
it depends on the contract, right? And everyone's different. You'd like to think, especially in a particular sense, usually there's a clause where you probably have to get permission for such things. I would imagine if it's, Philadelphia, who are certainly going to be rebuilding and probably rebuilding for a couple of years, if the Flyers are not in a playoff position and we get to the postseason, I can't imagine the Flyers having any sort of issue with him maybe joining a broadcast team for maybe a playoff push.
Yeah.
But we never know, right? I would like to see him in that role, but again, new role, maybe we'll see if, the leadership allows that to happen.
Well, Philadelphia would like to be in a playoff push themselves, or at least be close to relevance for making the playoff race and, hang on to their first round draft picks on top of that. Speaking of a team that has changed that, a third round draft pick in this year's draft, the Columbus Blue Jackets sent that pick that was originally owned by Calgary. They sent it to New Jersey to land defenseman Damon Severson, 8 years, $50 million for the defenseman, to basically sign and trade by New Jersey heading to Columbus. And this one was kind of an interesting one, Nick. There's a lot of people that have talked about, how the term and the contract are a bit of an overpay here. How do you feel about this one? We always get kind of punchy when it comes to 8-year contracts, but
we do. I think what's even more curious to me is what is going on with Jarmo Kekalainen. And I mean that respectfully, because throughout his tenure, he's really not, shall we say, been a big player in terms of big names, and it doesn't hurt that the franchise themselves has not really been, shall we say, in maybe tops of players' minds. But if you can take advantage of, shall we say, a system that's cap strapped and maybe add to the team, there's been a pretty big makeover by the Blue Jackets in the past 12 to 14 months. And you kind of wonder with Kekalainen too, that he's also sort of getting impatient. It goes back to the relief of their head coach recently too, right? Where a lot of blame maybe wasn't really placed on him and Brad Larson, but still made the change. And now is like, okay, well, I got to get more talent. So it's curious what I think Severson's worth that contract. But you do kind of wonder what the Blue Jackets sort of plan is. Again, now with Johnny Gaudreau, a few other key pieces that they're trying to build, you kind of wonder if they're just kind of sick and tired of, being in that spot where they're continued kind of, shall we say, bottom third of the league. And, it just is what it is. But, and maybe rumbling some up top that maybe Kekalainen may be on the hot seat. I don't know. That's maybe just all speculation in my own 36-year-old head. But it kind of feels that he's been more aggressive in, in the last couple of months to try to remake this Jackets roster in the fly. So I kind of think there's some pressure there as well.
Yeah, you almost feel like if it doesn't pan out, he might be gone. I think just kind of making those moves again. Severson will kind of be on probably that top pairing with Werenski, David Juracek, Adam Boquist, Andrew Peak, Eric Goodbranson, Nick Blankenberg round out the defensive core. Provorov as well, Jake Bean in that organization as well too. So a lot of defensemen to pull from there. Columbus is just kind of in a weird spot, like you said, where they've been kind of spinning their tires a little bit for the past couple of years and looking to find some traction. So you talk about, I think the underlying numbers for Severson, who, defensive metrics put him in the top third of the league in terms of his defensive and offensive metrics, but was a top 4 guy that moved into a bottom pairing guy for the past couple of years when John Marino, of course, was added this past offseason. So I think that has people a little bit on edge. Do you feel like he can suddenly jump into a top 4 or even a top 2 role and kind of run with it a little bit? So,
and you only know until you're thrown into in that spot, right? And again, it's a different organization. It's got a different staff and a different makeup. So maybe it's better suited. And sometimes it's just the way that the coach wants to play, right? It's nothing to do with the individual player. It is probably to a level, but I get the sense that this is more of a specific type of trade, especially from the New Jersey side of things, where, and for Columbus, it's still a big piece. And it shows that the sign and trade, right? You're not, Columbus wanted to make sure that if they're going to give up a pick like they did, that they had essentially some longevity with getting, shall I say, value for that pick. So it's going to work for both sides. I feel in New Jersey, speaking of a team that's kind of going for it, that's pretty massive.
Yeah, definitely a big change. Also, another team that had a very good rebound year like New Jersey this season, the Los Angeles Kings, re-signing pending unrestricted free agent defenseman Vladislav Gavrikov, the former Blue Jacket, to a 2-year extension, average annual value $5.875 million, full no move clause over those 2 years, and $10.2 million in signing bonuses. With this one, so the base salary is actually $775,000.
This contract. It sounds awfully familiar.
Chuck Fletcher, maybe. No, interesting, right? But in terms of those sign-on bonuses and things, I mean, it's only two years for the extension, so I mean, it's not like it's a heavy commitment, so to speak, but a great defensive defenseman, not an offensive push by any means. Maybe they want him to open that up a little bit, but with him and Derek Roy on the back end there, they've been a formidable shutdown force for the LA Kings, and they like what they see.
Yeah, and sometimes, and I think the cap strengths on teams, I think you would have seen a higher AAV, if you're not looking at essentially another year of flat cap here. So you're still getting your money as a player, but getting it in the form of signing bonuses is really what you're looking at. So it's different, but the GMs are getting creative to try to find ways to attract players, and signing bonus is one way to do that. Granted, there's still restrictions on that to a degree, but they made it happen.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, all the changes and the big trades obviously coming from LA, which makes me beg the question, by the way, does Jonathan Quick get a Stanley Cup ring? I don't think he does.
I think he does, actually, because it's not the...
I guess he's still dressed as a backup, technically.
Yeah, you have to appear, and I think it's 60 or 62 regular season games to have your name engraved on the cup.
Or one final game. So I guess if you're backing up, you're technically dressed, right?
I would, because you're not scratched. So So I think for sure he gets his name on the cup. Yeah,
that worked out.
I mean, Phil didn't even dress for one playoff game, and he's going to get one.
Yeah, well,
there you go.
Hot dogs. Someone who
mustard.
Someone who can bring the mustard in terms of being a speedster here. The Blackhawks re-signing forward Andreas Athanasiou, 2 years, $4.25 million average annual value. Have always loved him as a player. Think he brings a lot to the table with his foot speed. The Oilers in Edmonton signing Derek Ryan, the veteran, 2 years, $1.8 million for him. And then our final topic here, coming actually out of the concussion world a little bit here, Henri Richard, the longtime Canadian, of course, brother of the Rocket. Maurice Richard, diagnosed with CTE following his death in 2020. He was 84 when he passed a couple of years ago. Research finding that out. And of course, he was not a physical guy, not an enforcer by any means. So, kind of gives an idea, no surprise based on the time period and the physicality and the lack of protective gear. But,
right.
I think just kind of throwing that out there, thought it was an interesting little piece and thought we would
the case continues to build, right? And I know that the Steve Dangle podcast with Alan Walsh continues to hammer away at the NHL, and more specifically Gary Bettman on the NHL and the link to CTE, right? The NFL has taken that step, and you just kind of wonder if the NHL just simply won't do it because of the position they are in financially currently. But you also kind of wonder if there's other ulterior motives. I don't know. To me, it's got to be the bottom line, and that's about it. But the NHL still holding pat, and unless the commissioner changes, I don't really see that changing anytime soon either.
Certainly would agree, but what is changing is the future of our show, including Center Issue News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. So potentially we bid adieu for this segment for at least the time being as we move on to some changes and move on to the main portion of the show. And welcome into the Huskies Warming House podcast, episode 166 here in the den. Noah Grant, Nick Maxon, as always, joining you in the middle of June here, Nick. And we have only 2 topics left in the show. So, it kind of gives you an idea of where we're at for this week. A lot of changes coming up. We'll get to that in a moment. But the big topic here, of course, before we get to the big topic, I guess, the AHL Calder Cup finals will wrap up in the next week. So, we'll be keeping an eye on that. Of course, Game 4 will be coming up tomorrow / when the show comes out on Thursday. Game 5 would be on Saturday. Game 6, if needed, is on Monday. Game 7 on Wednesday. So a big comeback victory in overtime for the Hershey Bears to bring that series back to 2-1. Before that, Coachella Valley had outscored them 9-0 over the first 2 games, and finally Hershey gets one 5-4 in overtime in Game 3. So
they were up 4-1 too before Coachella came back and tied it. To bring it to overtime. So you talk about huge for Hershey. That was almost a must-win game, and they got it done.
Yeah, Coachella Valley, they're on fire. I guess they're the Firebirds, so I guess that
that was a Fuego comment. Nice.
Boy, we're pitiful, aren't we? You know what wasn't pitiful is the effort for both of these teams, regardless of a 4-1 finish in the Stanley Cup final. A lot of injuries, a lot of physicality. These squads here. Really, to kind of break it down here, there's a lot of pieces that go into this. Obviously, 4-1 the final in terms of the series score. Florida does get their first victory in Stanley Cup final history with that overtime come from behind win in game number 3. 9-3 was the final for the clinching game the other night, which was kind of tough.
Yep.
On the Vegas side, Jonathan Marchessault, second among all skaters this spring, 25 points in 22 games, only trailed Jack Eichel, of course, 13 goals, tied for the lead in the playoffs with Leon Draisaitl of Edmonton. He wins the Conn Smythe as the MVP. I don't know, Nick. Obviously he was really good. Did you feel like he was the guy? I think no secret if Florida had gone on and hung on, Matthew Tkachuk was the guy. No doubt about it on that side of things. Did you feel that Marchessault was the right pick, or did you feel Jack Eichel, Aiden Hill? Was there anybody else that stood out to you that you felt maybe could have been close to Marchessault, who had a great playoffs, no doubt?
To me, it would have been Aiden Hill. That would have been my 1A or 1B, right? Jack Eichel, I think, he should be in that conversation too, just because the way that he carried himself throughout the entirety of the playoffs, especially on the defensive side of the puck, definitely took open ice in front of him when he did have the puck, and at times he felt like it was necessary or had an opportunity, but he wasn't selfish. He played a very team forward game, sort of kind of evolved as a player, and how about this, right? Connor McDavid, multiple trips to playoffs. Again, he was number 2 behind.
Yeah.
McDavid, number 1, his first ever trip, and he goes all the way and hoists the Stanley Cup. I can imagine Edmonton fans are probably trembling right now, and especially if you're Connor McDavid watching. I mean, wow, what a first way, to go through a playoff run to go all the way to the Cup. It's tough, right? Marchessault had, was it 11 straight games with a goal, something like that. So going back to what essentially the first round or late or early second round.
And how painful is it to be a Florida Panthers fan and know that the guy that burns you used to be a Panther?
Yeah, both him and Riley Smith. Riley Smith tallied again in last night's clinching game. I can only imagine the emotions.
Who didn't?
Right, that's fair. Yeah, at the end of it, I think it probably was the hot name. Again, I would have been fine with Adin Hill too, although, was he overshadowed a bit by maybe the Bobrovsky talk early on, even though Bobrovsky throughout the series was not nearly the same goaltender as we saw through the first 3 rounds.
Well, didn't play the entire playoffs too, did Adin Hill either. And right. I think another guy that fits that bill, I really like Jack Eichel for the pick, actually. I still thought he was really underrated.
He is.
Mark Stone, if he would have had another round or two, probably would have been in that conversation very quickly. What a Stanley Cup final he had.
Hat trick and holy cow! I mean, isn't that the stuff you dream of when you're on the backyard pond? Just not only score the game winner in Game 7. This was Game 5, but you get a hat trick in a cup clinching game. I mean, I don't know how you can top that in terms of his personal career. So pretty insane. I'm okay with the Marchessault pick. I still think he deserves that Conn Smythe Trophy, but you could have made an argument for both Jack Eichel as well as Adin Hill, and I think either one of those 3 names would have been well deserving of it.
Yeah, and I think too, when you look at just all the players that Vegas brought, I mean, they really just continue to pick up steam as they went, and part of that was staying healthy. We're going to touch on that in just a few moments. I'm glad it wasn't a 4-0 sweep. Certainly could have went to, I think, at least 6 games had Florida gotten a bounce maybe in Game 1, but Vegas just was a train that would not stop rolling. Part of that, again, was the injury bug. Let's touch on that a little bit here. Florida definitely banged up, and we hear about this in the playoffs all the time as we go through the big one. Aaron Ekblad broke his foot, twice dislocated his shoulder, tore his oblique in the playoffs, and had a mild concussion after round 3. I mean, he broke
walking.
I don't know. I mean, he broke his foot in the first round against Boston, and so you think that that's tough. Obviously, we saw Matthew Tkachuk come back in game number 3. Well, the reason being he missed Game 5, a fractured sternum from game number 3. Played number 4, but Paul Maurice, the head coach of the Florida Panthers, said he didn't dress himself for Game 4. Somebody helped him get his gear on. Somebody tied his skates. Somebody put his jersey on for him. Of course, he led Florida with 11 goals, 24 points, and 20 playoff contests. 1 point behind Jonathan Marchessault, by the way. So that's kind of what we talked about that conversation. But I mean, you can't even get your gear on, and they're giving you pain medication. They're doing whatever, and you can't even do that. And you're playing an entire NHL game in the Stanley Cup final.
A series that was physical too.
Extremely. Radko Gudas, high ankle sprain, should have required 6 weeks of rehab. He'll get that now. Obviously, Sam Bennett as well might require shoulder surgery. Had a tough time getting his gear on as well too. You look at the physical toll that it takes on some of these players. The Stanley Cup playoffs, I think, just breed a different level. And what an impressive run for Florida. Obviously, we've talked about it so much throughout our show here, but as obviously great it is for Vegas to, win their first Stanley Cup in franchise history in only their 6th or 7th year, and build up what they've done as well too. You really kind of feel for Florida because it really felt like this Cinderella story. And, as we talk about with the playoffs, sometimes it really is a war of attrition. Who can stay healthy the longest? Whose top guns can continue to kind of not be on the mend, so to speak? And for Florida, it just felt like they got into that final round, and even with the time off after the 3rd round, just couldn't avoid, the injury bug in the ambulance, so to speak.
No, and there's another name that never played in the final. That was Eetu Luostarinen, who was key as a top 6 forward for Florida too, right? So, Florida just, again, as you mentioned, it Cinderella run. I think most of America was pulling for Florida again. 30 years almost in the league, and it seemed to like they were and again, the accomplishments that it took for them to get to this point, beating Boston, then Toronto, and then Carolina. I mean, it was a gauntlet of a role. You just kind of wonder throughout that very difficult first 3 rounds, just the beast that is the Stanley Cup playoffs took its toll physically, and it certainly seemed that that's what happened, because I think you and I would both agree, Noah, that if Florida was even half more healthy going into the final, may have been a not necessarily a different result in terms of who hoisted the Stanley Cup, but maybe a closer series, and maybe it goes 6-7 games. But nonetheless, you can't take away what Florida accomplished, and they've re-energized a fan base that certainly was due for some good times.
Yeah, certainly would agree. You have a healthy, Barkov, Kachuk, Bennett. You have some of those guys, Gudas, who actually was a force still in the playoffs. Just having some of those guys healthy, I think, is important. But, at the same time, I mean, we just talked about like Mark Stone, for example, Vegas, Lauren Brossoit going down, Aiden Hill catching fire, obviously.
Logan Thompson, too. They're starting goals even before.
An all-star. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you kind of have to find your way through those battles. Some of it's a little bit of luck too, getting bounces, getting opportunities like we talked about in game 1, the big paddle save, and Florida hits about 6 posts in that one. They go up 1-0 in the series. It's a whole different ball game, right? So, So obviously, a great run though to see 2 different teams that we don't normally see in the Cup final. So I think that was a lot of fun. Is there anything else you wanted to add related to the Stanley Cup final?
Yeah. Wouldn't you love to be on Las Vegas Boulevard whenever that Cup parade is? Oh my gosh, I can only imagine what the brain trusts are thinking in terms of that, because I've said it before and I'll say it again. I know it gets reported on, but from someone who's been down and been to a couple of Golden Knights games in that arena, including last season, their last home game, even, they were kind of on the downward spiral. That is quickly becoming a hockey hotbed. Jesse Granger, who is the Athletic beat reporter, did a fantastic article in terms of since 2017, and the interest in youth hockey was, I think the number was like 86 or less than 100 kids, and now it's over 1,000. The amount of like hockey equipment stores, you used to have to go to California essentially. Now there's hockey equipment stores popping up in Las Vegas. They're building more new rinks. They've got now probably 10 to 12 sheets that the public can use. So unreal, right? It's cool. The other part of it, can Florida repeat this, right? I think the real true test for Florida now is, they've made the playoffs now 4 straight seasons. This is their first trip to the final since 92. Can they repeat this? I think Matthew Tkachuk showed the world that he was the right man to be brought in. I think both of us questioned the return that Florida gave up in terms of Mackenzie Weegar, as well as
Jonathan
Huberdeau, right? But great, right? I think still great playoffs. The final still was entertaining, to say the least, because either way, one team is hoisting the first cup. Congrats to Vegas, and off to the off season we go.
Yeah, and unsung guys like, guys that even weren't there when they first made their cup run, like Zach Whitecloud, for example, former Bemidji State Beaver, by the way. So, a lot of guys obviously very happy for them. And Jack Eichel, who a guy that I think has really matured over the last couple of years, for him to win a Stanley Cup, obviously very exciting. Moving on to the last topic of the show, of course, no extra ice session today. We have changes coming to the show. When we mention the AHL playoffs, by the way, that will probably be the last thing that we actually pull that is outside of the college hockey realm into the future of the show, unless there's something so incredibly crazy groundbreaking that it just like shatters the earth. The fans have spoken here. So we did a fan poll that talked a little bit about kind of what they thought about the future of our show. Our options were essentially keeping the show as it was, about 90 minutes, smorgasbord of topics like we normally do. Second option was essentially St. Cloud and conference only stuff. So NCHC, WCHA, men's and women's Huskies hockey, that would be the show. And then third option was that plus the Minnesota Wild. And then you also could give us another option if you had additional information. 14% wanted to keep it as is, and 14% said the Minnesota Wild. One person had additional comments for us, but 70% of you said St. Cloud only, WCHA, NCHC, about a 60-minute show maximum for us. And we've listened, and safe to say this is being implemented next week. And by next week, we mean in about 10 days. We're kind of taking about not even a full week off, because normally it's about 2 weeks when we take a week off. It's about half of that essentially, about 10 days or so. The whole plan for us to start with, shows are probably going to come out on Mondays now moving forward. And this trend will probably continue into the season. In fact, maybe even Tuesdays, but we're going to shoot for Mondays at least to start. So obviously we used to have the show come out on Sundays. We're pushing that back an extra day just to give us a chance to kind of push things out, because we are only doing St. Cloud hockey from here on out. We want to kind of have that opportunity. Now, there is a little bit of flexibility there. Not so much in the summer. I think we're going to try to be on the ball as much as we can in the summer. The reason those things might change as the schedule comes out, we get into the season. I guess I didn't mention this in the open of the show, Nick. I passed my boards and I am currently a registered nurse in the state of North Dakota and just started my job this week. So, when I'm being a nurse, when I'm being a nurse, apparently I'm supposed to show up to work at my scheduled time, obviously. So, if we have times where I'm working a weekend or I'm working Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, for example, obviously that throws a pretty big wrench into things when we're trying to report on games that happen, after Friday, Saturday. So just kind of bear that in mind. We're going to do the best we can, but apparently I'm adulting now. Yeah, no kidding. I took the long way around. I did the chutes and ladders and kept hitting the chutes, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to explain it. Yeah, sure.
Nick, were you probably around when they invented chutes and ladders, huh? I mean, that's
I'm not sure. I think it's actually been around a lot longer than I have, which isn't saying much, but considering I can still see the first initial light from the Big Bang. So,
Yeah, game used to be played on a stone tablet, right?
Yeah, the hammer and chisel was not fun. I'll say that much.
Yeah. And of course, Nick, obviously, going through some changes professionally for him as well, too. So a transition, as one would call it. So obviously a lot of moving parts for us as well, too. So, there might be some continued tweaks as we roll things out in the first couple of weeks as well, too. So we'll keep you informed on that as well. But what will this look like? There's things that look a little bit different in the summer because, of course, we're limiting what we're reporting on. In season, it's a little bit different. So starting in season, which of course is when we get the most listenership, the most viewership, which makes sense. The Huskies are back in action. NCHC is rolling. WCHA action. It's the best time of year. College hockey is in full swing. The general scope of things is essentially we're splitting the show into two halves. We're just going to have an NCHC report for the men and then talk about St. Cloud State men's hockey, talk about their recap for the weekend, anything notable around the league, kind of recap, the league as a whole too, and talk about games in the NCHC, little things that we know, really kind of try to dive slightly more in depth into the NCHC as a whole and how St. Cloud and their weekends fit into that. And same thing on the women's side. The WCHA will have its own report and women's hockey will have its allocated time as well, too. Things obviously changing from week to week. Sometimes the women don't play, the men do play. If we get a big story, for example, like Arizona State University potentially joining the NCHC, we're going to talk about that in the next show. That would be something that we definitely want to pull into the NCHC as we start things going on. So, Nick, before we get to our summer plans, anything you wanted to add about the in-season plans, just kind of the fan poll in general and just kind of the general direction of the fact that the Huskies Warming House podcast is essentially coming back to its roots, shortening the show and really doing the core of what we set out to do?
They're telling us we need to shut up is what it sounds like.
I mean, we're in agreement on that, right?
I mean, that's fair. But yeah, no, I think we've even, when we've gone through the shows as of late, right? When we're trying to cover so much ground, it can feel a bit, I don't want to say exhausting, but it can feel like we're missing something.
We're stretched thin.
Yeah. And I think for the fans, the diehard fans, love them or you hate them, depending on which, where you're listening from. And especially after how the Huskies do on us Saturday night.
Our DMs have been interesting at times.
Yes, they have. But this fan base loves their hockey team, and that's what they turned to us for, right? They want to hear the stories in and outside the locker room. They want to know the breakdown of when the Huskies win, when they lose. Why did it happen? They want the meat and potatoes. And as you mentioned, when we essentially first started this back in January of 2020, which I can't believe that was a thing.
Wow.
and continued this through a pandemic, which essentially kind of almost pushed us to do it more because, again, I'm not trying to reminisce too much here, but this is going to be sort of a Sports Center 3-camera setup, and then let's say our production crew didn't show up, to put it lightly, and then we were really just like, well, this isn't going to work. And then the pandemic happened, and then we said, well, hold on a second, maybe this is something that we can do to keep our chops fresh. And at that time, of course, we didn't know how long or what was ahead of us, and here we are, how many months? 37, 38 months later, and
yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, I was in a different major, and totally switched through that. And we had a lot of changes. Obviously, you were still going to school, of course, at that time too. So, a lot of things, obviously, we look back on. Of course, this will essentially be our 4th season and change, so to speak, covering Huskies hockey. And I think that's awesome. It's crazy to think about. I mean, obviously, COVID eligibility aside for, some of these seniors on the men's team, but you think about a guy like Vieti Miettinen, right? Like, we've been doing this show basically as long as he's been a Husky, like it's kind of wild to think about. And, now he's a senior, so as far as
the show is a senior, I think we're entering our senior of eligibility. I don't know. Maybe it's what they use at the old folks home to help them fall asleep or something. But I want.
But one of the concepts that has been a really hot ticket item, and one of the things that I think you and I really love doing, the summertime is a really fun time to really kind of open things up for some of the teams that we don't get to look at in depth, in the sense of like actually just taking a look at their team and seeing what they bring to the table, where they're going to be at, looking how we think the WCHA and the NCHC is going to pan out next season. And why do I mention both leagues? Because you'll say, if you're an avid listener of the show, you go, wait a minute, you've only done NCHC previews for the past couple of years. What are you talking about the WCHA about? Well, the WCHA is going to be in the mix here this year for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to run from what we predict next season standings are going to be. We're going to start on June 26th or thereabouts with the women's hockey preview for the team we believe is going to finish 8th in the WCHA. Spoiler alert, we're starting with the Bemidji State Beavers in about 10 days or so. So we're going to start.
Good at keeping secrets, are you?
I'm not. It's tough. But that's where we're starting with. We're going to start with the women's side, and then the following week around July 3rd, we'll do the men's team on the 8th place side of things. So how this is going to roll out, obviously, women's, men's, all the way through this here. Now, a couple of caveats to kind of note here. We'll be going in order of what we think the finishing order is besides St. Cloud. St. Cloud, as is tradition, will be the last teams for the final 2 previews, on the women's side, and then on the men's side here. Where that comes into play a little bit interestingly is when we get down to the nitty gritty, actually when we hit September 25th, around there, which will be the men's hockey preview for who we believe is going to be the first place team in the NCHC, or second place team, depending on how we think the conference is going to shake out. That is actually when women's hockey will be finishing their first weekend of hockey. So they will actually get a recap for that weekend, along with the men's hockey preview for that team. Then the following week, the full women's hockey St. Cloud preview on October 2nd will come out, because the women's team will be off that weekend. So, in fact, there's no Huskies teams that play that weekend. So the women's hockey preview will be going on. They don't play again until the 7th. And that's also when the men's team opens up their season. So we'll recap that first weekend while doing the men's hockey preview. So it's actually going to move a lot later than we have in the past. But one, that lets us get the full scope of teams as they continue to round out their rosters, start into training camp, start to get exhibition games rolling. And actually, both of these teams are going to get their previews after their first matchups of the season. So we really get to take a look at the lineup cards, take a look at kind of what we've seen, and really talk about how I think, especially last week, we mentioned the men's hockey lineup card, really get to talk about it in depth, as not only are these the incoming freshmen, this is who's here. This is really what we anticipate based on the group that we have. And I think as the summer goes along, as those teams have essentially recruited well, played well, and earned our pick as potentially the higher up teams, we're going to push later into summer and give them an opportunity to round out their rosters, and for us to get a more accurate read on what are they really bringing to the table? Do they really deserve the selection spot that we picked for them? So, Nick, this was a brainchild of yours when we started the NCHC previews. And honestly, probably one of my favorite things that we do every year, especially outside of the hockey season. You look back on it, it was a no-brainer for you. It was obviously a genius idea. Kind of talk about, where that fits in for us, but more importantly, expanding it to women's hockey and kind of our preview for the summer. What are your overall thoughts? What do you want fans to know?
I think, you put yourself in the fan shoes, right? And that is, at the end of each season, because the sporting world, whether it's pro or college, it doesn't end anymore, right? So you're thinking ahead, well, what are my chances of my team? And more importantly, when you've got two of the best college hockey conferences in the women's and the WCHA, and then the NCHC, who is still a top tier team. Yes, I threw some clout. Sorry, Big Ten. But at the end of it, you're trying to think, well, what are we up against, right? What does it look like? Now, granted, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't pretend that we know what April is going to bring and who's going to be there and who's going to win the national championship. But I do think, as a fan, right, you're trying to think, okay, well, what does this season pose? What are the challenges? What are some of the returners? Are there going to be big movers up and down the standings, right? What are we up against? And I think that's really what it spawned from is, how can we create a conversation in the off season that is still insightful, but also maybe a little bit fun and predictable too, throw in some of our maybe some knowledge. I said maybe because I'm not sure.
Or lack thereof if you're talking about North Dakota last year. Holy smokes.
Yeah, I'm going to put blame on you. But anyway.
I do live in North Dakota, so I try to be generous, and I was way over generous.
That's what happens. So, in true spite, we'll say they're going to be bad and they're going to run away with the NCHC. This is kind of how that thing's going to work. But that's really what the impact is, right? We're trying to set the table. We're trying to give, like I said, a little bit more of an in-depth look at each team and what to expect. And, is there a potential for this team to make noise, or is there a team that made noise that's due for a little bit of a step back just because of how the college hockey landscape works? It's kind of like riding the wave, right? You're going to have up periods, you're going to have down periods. What's realistic? And that's where the conversation starts, and it keeps the fans engaged, and it's kind of the whole idea behind it.
Keeps us engaged too, right? And being able to talk about the core of what we enjoy too, which is the WCHA and the NCHC. Like we mentioned, again, June 26th is the women's hockey preview, followed by July 3rd for the first men's hockey preview. We'll alternate in that order, women's, then men's. Obviously, no one's going to remember this if they're driving in their car, but if you happen to be looking at a calendar, tentatively, July 10th, 17th, 24th, and 31st will get us through previews 8, 7, and 6 for each women's and men's. August 7th, 14th, 20th, and 27th will get us down to the next couple of teams, 4 more teams total. And then September 4th, 11th, 18th, and 25th, we get all the way through the rest of the teams in the first 2 weekends. October 2nd and 9th of October is our women's and men's preview for St. Cloud State, respectively. So it's exciting. I mean, really, the show is mapped out for the next couple of months, which is really awesome. Previews are a lot of work. We work very hard on them. And obviously, we're going to pull some elements from the past couple of years that we've done. We might scratch some things, might change some things. I'll try to keep the stats to a minimum. I say that every year, but really, trying to really condense the show. We obviously doing this poll, it's not just about, we want you to do St. Cloud only content. And we really want to devote that and cut all things out besides St. Cloud content. We want to respect the timepiece too, keeping it an hour at maximum, hopefully less in most cases, and really kind of giving a good, accurate depiction of how we feel about the Huskies, but not droning on or anything like that. I tend to do, I should say. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. I would, if you haven't figured this out by now, which a lot of people have, the backstory to this, okay, that's Nick's soundboard for those who are curious. You realize how many months and months I've gone after he's gotten this soundboard of him saying, can you hear this? Can you hear this? And he could not get it to work. And he finally has figured it out. So it had to.
Well, that's a different way of using the internal soundboard. There was external soundboards that were trying to happen, and it just needed a little tweaking.
Is your internal soundboard usually screaming? I would imagine that would be
Depends on which voice I'm listening to.
You know, for those who haven't figured this out, by the way, where I was going is, of course, I'm an only child, which I think it explains so much about me. But I think more, you just want to pounce on that one. I know you do, but
the door was open.
Yeah, not only the door was, it was 9-3 Vegas with a couple of minutes left. Let's just put it that way. The cup was already out of the case at that point.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think the big thing is I like to talk a lot. So I try to do it for, a semi side job, half living podcast type thing. So I think that's the most important way I can put that. Obviously as well too, as we move forward, we love for everybody to be a part of it, too. Obviously our fans, with our Twitter, of course, maybe gives us a chance to maybe be more engaged or more refined into some St. Cloud hockey stuff as well, to promote some of those things as well. If you know a great brewery that wants to be a part of the experience, add them to the list, whatever works. If you want to be a part of this.
A single child running a podcast, doing a show in a brewery, that just spells disaster.
Obviously we don't have any brewery sponsors here. You ever had Northeast, by the way?
You mean, Brain Melt Northeast? Yeah.
I'm a big fan. I'm just saying, that's kind of been my recent choice in recent weeks. I'm a big kind of wheat beer IPA type guy, and that's
not even close to an IPA, but that's all right.
Well, okay, but it's not exactly. It's not. It's not like a Bud Light or a Budweiser where it's like
sort of is, because it's just cooked longer.
You know what?
It is.
You know what? Some would say at your age, Nick, maybe you've been cooked a little bit longer.
I've been well past, the temperature. I'm burnt on the inside. So
yeah,
a lot of people's eardrums are burnt from this episode already. So
yeah, well, this is going to be the future of our show. It's just us. But yeah, obviously, a very exciting time for us. I think for us, too. Listening to the fans obviously is very important, because that drives what we do. We want to hear your feedback. If there's specific things you want in the previews for both the men's or the women's side, or moving into, the NCHC report, the WCHA report, as we move into the season, things to kind of hit on during season. If you have any comments, things like that, at Warming House Den on Twitter, you can DM us as well too. We'd love to hear your feedback. We do this show as we've always had, and we've always made revisions and tried to do things in the best interest of the fans. And I think that when we first started and when we first made changes to the show and it got to the length that it was, the idea was the weekly roundup was supposed to give you an idea of what had happened in the hockey world for the week. The main show was supposed to hit on a couple of key points, especially the Huskies during the season, and the extra ice session added a topic that we felt that we wanted to expand on in depth a little bit too. And that was great. It gave you a chance to essentially kind of pick and choose your content if you felt like you wanted to do those pieces. But again, kind of trying to continue to make changes as we go through. That's been the basis of our show. If you go back, we should do that one day, actually, Nick, is maybe go back and pick an early episode and see how things have changed, because used to have besides the intro, I don't even know what you would call ad spots. Center ICU and Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup is, I guess, as close to an ad spot as you would want to call it. And they're obviously, Bill Prout's work is still going to be a big part of our show too, and kind of mentioning that, but really, we had no essentially breaking up of content. It was just straight through. And now obviously that has changed, and now we'll have to reformat. We might even have new graphics come next show as well too.
Hilarious.
Well, I don't know. Depends on how much time I have. It's kind of debatable, and where we feel the next direction is.
That's the good news. If you don't have time, then it's great. If you give yourself an hour, it's like you can't help yourself. So
yeah, I need a bit more than an hour for the graphics. They're an all day project. There's no doubt about that.
They're a tedious little thing. Anyway,
yeah, they are. But obviously, excited about this change. Excited for our fans to lead us into this next direction, the fourth season of Huskies hockey that we cover. Nick, we're approaching just over 48 minutes here. Any final thoughts you want to add here as we kind of move into the next piece of things?
What could I say that you haven't already covered in the past 7 minutes?
Sorry. No, you're right. Obviously, again, very exciting time. And obviously we want to make sure that everybody is kind of pushed in that direction and kind of knows our next steps. And we want you to be a part of it too. So obviously don't be afraid to reach out and kind of give us our thoughts. One of the things I've been really excited about personally, Nick, our viewership
on the show at some points. Yeah, no,
well, that too, but it, actually, come to think of it, Would you like to do that? Would we like to have one of us do the women's hockey hosting? The other one does the men's hockey hosting for the previews this summer? How does that sound?
Let's flip a coin for it.
We can flip a coin. I've got a coin here. You want to call it in the air? I don't know. Sure. But on top of that too, our YouTube viewership has really grown in the past year as well too, and continues to grow. And hopefully as we move into the season, that continues as well too. So a lot of great things for us at the Huskies Warming House podcast that we're excited to roll out, obviously. So are we doing this coin flip thing? Are we doing this for real?
And then the show's over. So here we go.
The show is over. Are you calling it in the air? Is that how we're doing this?
Yep.
All right.
Tails.
It is tails. So Nick,
give me the men's.
Yeah, I figured that one was coming. So I will be handling the women's hockey previews coming up next week. And then Nick, of course, men's hockey the week after, alternate as we see. Big changes to the show. Tweet us at Warming House Den or DM us. We'd love to hear what you think. For Nick Maxon, I am Noah Grant, and we will see you soon for episode 167 in the Den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL! A game winner!
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.